Hey everybody, my name's Andy Truitt and I am the Director of Interns and Outdoor Leadership at Spring Canyon Retreat and Conference Center. And I'm here with Wesley Dickinson, who is our guest speaker for Summer Celebration 1, Homeschool Week. And of course, we are having to do that virtually because of the COVID pandemic. By God's grace, Wesley and I were able to be together here for a little while so we could make this recording. And we are going to talk about homeschooling. And we're both very excited about it. We're both homeschool dads. And so without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Wesley to begin our conversation.
Right. So this year's been a little bit strange for everybody, right?
Absolutely.
And we've had a lot of, I've heard them called accidental homeschoolers, right? Families that weren't used to having their kids at home to do the schooling since we had the COVID pandemic and schools were closed. So they spent the last couple months at home with their students, and we've had lots of questions about, gosh, how do I homeschool? How do I do this? All kinds of questions. So we just wanted to run through some of those questions today and see if we could provide some insight to some families that are wanting to know, well, what else can I do? Or how can I do this differently? Or are there other things that I can add to this? So that was one of the things that Andy and I wanted to run through today, was just some of these options that are available. One of the questions that I get is, well, why do families homeschool, right?
Right.
At least in some of the circles that I homeschool in, one of the big answers is the secular nature of the public school system. There's families that want to have a more Christian-based homeschool and focus on Christ with their homeschool. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the big reasons.
Absolutely.
One of the reasons that I was surprised by when I was looking at what was growing, one of the largest growing number of reasons, or the reason, is bullying and not being able to get a resolution to the bullying that's going on in a school system, so the parents actually pull their students out to homeschool for that reason. Another reason is academics. Depending on what district the families live in, they want to provide a different rigor of academics than is available with the other options of sending their students to schools. The next reason is one of my favorites, and I know that Andy really enjoys this too. It's the relationship that you as a homeschool parent, whether you're a homeschool mom or a homeschool dad, you get to have with your child, your student. That's one of your favorite, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for teeing me up there, because one of the most important things about being a parent is being a parent.
Right.
And the best way to be a parent, as far as I can tell, is to be present and attentive with our children. I mean, if you think about it, we are present and attentive with our jobs. We are present and attentive in our hobbies. And sometimes, by nature of the way that things happen, we may not be as present and attentive with our children as we could be. Dare I say, as we should be.
Right.
So, as parents and as Christian parents, we're called to educate our children, teach our children, help our children become adults, right? And so that relationship aspect is vital as we're able to model for our children. And even if you're not coming from a Christian perspective, if you're looking at the studies with regard to what is the greatest indicator of success for a child reaching adulthood. And in every study, whether it's secular or Christian, no matter what measure we are using to define success, the answer is the number one indicator or predictor of success is a present and attentive mother and father.
Right.
So absolutely, that relationship aspect is very important. And as I was raising my family, I was struck with the idea that there really isn't a better way to be present and attentive. There are ways to be present and attentive that don't include homeschooling, but homeschooling just kind of automatically makes it so.
Right.
So
absolutely, I totally agree with the relationship piece. With my girls, it's been amazing, and I know that your boys are towards the end of that homeschool journey, and I'm on the other end of it, just coming into it. But I can tell the difference just being able to be with my kids, right? And,
absolutely.
And instill those virtues and those character that we want them to have, God-fearing adults that that love Jesus. And the academics, I'm finding they work themselves out.
Yes.
If we can nail the virtues and the characters with our students, right?
Absolutely.
And
Agree.
then one of the other reasons that I missed that a lot of parents, or a number of parents, will homeschool for is just the individual student needs. There's some students that the parents don't feel their needs are being met in whatever district they happen to be in, whether it's a dyslexia or dysgraphia or ADHD. The parents believe and are able to provide a more individualized education for their students, again, with the relationship, right? God gives us our children, and who knows our children better than the parents?
Absolutely. I mean, and that goes back to the relationship piece, right? Who knows
Absolutely.
our children better than we do as their parents? Why don't we take a minute right now, though, because I think it's interesting when we talk about the individual needs of the student. You have multiple children.
Right.
I have multiple children. So we both are keenly aware of the fact that every child is different. So why don't you tell the folks how many children you have and their ages?
All right. Okay. So I have two, both girls. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. So we are relatively at the beginning of this homeschool journey, which is it's a great adventure. And you have?
And so, yes, so I have 3 boys. They are 17, 19, and 21. So I've actually got 2 that are in college. And for all intents and purposes, my wife Heidi and I have homeschooled from the beginning with all 3 of our boys. So it can be done. Homeschool children can go to college and be successful. So I have 2 in college and 1 that's still at home. And I'd agree with you. The adventure is amazing. It's fantastic. And again, to highlight the fact that all children are different, and that our modern public school system really tends to try to have a one-size-fits-all mentality, and so yet, as we were discussing, this is another reason why many families consider homeschooling, because their children don't all fit into that one-size-fits-all.
And really, when we talk about this adventure, there's many paths to the adventure of homeschooling, right? And every family is different, whether it's the student's needs, the student's learning style, the parents' needs and their teaching style, or jobs. And there's different dynamics, and maybe we could just take a few moments here to run through some of the options for ways that you can homeschool. I think that this season that we've just finished and come through shows one of the most certainly this year, one of the most popular ways is you're using the public school system at home, but you're also getting some live guidance from those public school teachers in the districts where the parents aren't completely on their own, but it's doing that same curriculum at home.
Absolutely.
Now, even before this whole pandemic hit, there were families that were taking that public school curriculum and they were doing it at home, but they weren't necessarily interacting on a frequent basis with the public school teachers. It was the parents that were teaching, but they were teaching that public school curriculum at home. So completely boxed, ready to go. The parents were able to just take the books actually from a lot of the school districts. They could pick them up and do that at home with their students and be involved, right? Be the involved mommy, be the involved daddy with their students, but still use that curriculum. There's a number of other boxed curriculums that are ready to go that span quite a variety.
Yes.
And we can't run through all of them at this point.
No.
But it's just ready for you. If you want to be a homeschool parent, you can take it off the shelf and all the questions are answered and it's ready to go. There's a growing, a number of families will do this unschooling, which you'll hear about unschooling, and it's on a spectrum with whether or not you get a positive feeling about it. I think that the general idea of unschooling is you're letting the student lead by their interests.
Correct.
So whatever really gets that student excited is what they get to dig into, and they don't just do a surface study, they dig deep. So if they want to look into Egyptians in the history piece, they will go really deep into that. Or if there's a science aspect that they want to go into, it goes really deep into that. Is that your understanding of how many families will follow an unschooling right model of
Absolutely.
homeschool.
I think that's a very fair representation. Like you said, there can be some negative connotations with unschooling. Even the word itself, right, kind of sounds like we are anti-schooling because we're unschooling. And I don't think that's generally the case. I think that you are spot on in that it's about letting the student be a little bit more of the leader. The interesting thing about the unschoolers is they start really early. So even when the children are really, really young, the parents are letting the children determine what the curriculum is, basically, and it can change, on a whim sometimes.
Right.
So, but it's not necessarily that they're anti-schooling or that their children aren't learning anything.
Right.
So it's much more of a robust perspective than that, which leads into also interest-led learning, which is not the same as unschooling in that it is more of a unit-based kind of a curriculum. So there is more of a structured curriculum. Nonetheless, the students are kind of leading based on their interest. Would that be a fair assessment?
That's the way I would describe it. I would describe it with a little bit more parent-teacher input on the direction of the school and what those units are going to be selected. The parent-teacher says, well, you know what, my student really likes this, and we're going to grab all this stuff together in a unit, and we're going to do this unit study, and then we're going to do this unit study.
Right.
So the parent's more involved with charting that course, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Another really popular model of homeschooling is Charlotte Mason, right?
Absolutely.
Which borderline, I mean, it has a lot of elements that are very similar to the classical education model, right? Is that your
Absolutely, I think
way you describe it?
I would describe it, and I think Charlotte Mason proponents and advocates and users of themselves would say that they are absolutely implementing a classical model, a classical approach. So now we're getting into a more structured system with a curriculum and a method. So we previously we talked about the options for homeschooling or the ways out there that we can homeschool, and a lot of that was about the curriculum, right? Whether you're using the public school curriculum or one of those boxed curriculum that you mentioned. With Charlotte Mason, we begin to get into this idea of classical education, which actually is a method of education, and also in Charlotte Mason there is a curriculum to go along with it to help follow the method.
Right. So, and we just started talking to Charlotte Mason, so now we said classical model a couple times. Do we want to go very deep into the classical
I think,
at this point? Or
well, I think we'll go deeper later.
Okay.
But the classical model in general right now, a good way to describe the classical model would be the way that education happened for thousands of years until about the turn of the 20th century.
I think that's fair.
So we call it classical because it harkens back to the classical era in Greek and Roman history.
Right.
And so we'll dive a little bit deeper into that as we move on. But classical education is a form of education that has been around for a very, very long time. And many would argue that even in the early years of the founding of America, even up to the time of Laura Ingalls Wilder, the one-room schoolhouse in America, that really that was a variation or an implementation of a classical method.
Absolutely. So we end up with this large menu, all these different options. You've got lots of parents that are saying, you know what, I kind of enjoyed the couple months that I was at home with my students. How do I choose one of these models or one of these curriculums? Like, what would be best for my family? What would you say to those families that are saying, gosh, how do I choose? I mean, Andy's doing this, Wesley's doing that. I know someone down the street that's doing another model. What's right for my family?
Right.
How would families decide that?
I think that's the million-dollar question. Once a family decides that they want to try homeschooling or begin the adventure of homeschooling, then that's the question. Well, what do I do? Because there are so many options. And remember, keeping in mind that the whole point, I think, that you and I would agree is being able to be present and attentive, as parents with our children as we are helping them to become adults. And so I would recommend that the best way to choose, whatever method it is that you're going to choose, is to keep that in mind. And really, it's about loving God, loving your spouse, and loving your kids. And we don't need to go into an exegesis about the word love and scriptural love and what all that means. I think most of our audience is going to understand that. But ponder that for a moment. Right. Love God, love your spouse, love your kids. In that order, with that precedence, with that perspective, and then make your decision about whether or not you're going to homeschool and which method or curriculum you're going to choose for homeschooling. I think love God, love your husband, love your kids.
I think that's perfectly said. I'm not sure about you. When my wife and I started this, I was really nervous about academics. And nervous, gosh, are they going to learn everything that they need to learn? Right. Am I going to cover everything? Are there going to be holes in their education? And as I get further down this path, I'm finding that the academics work themselves out. The most important part, at least for my family, for my tribe, for homeschooling is instilling the virtue and the characters that I want in my daughters to become God-fearing, just Jesus-loving adults, right? That the virtues and the character come from watching those parents love God, love each other, and love the kids, right?
Absolutely. I mean, very well said. And, that leads me to another thought, another question that I have for you, because you mentioned that, you've noticed this as you and your wife have been on this journey for a little bit of time now. But at first, you were nervous, and maybe your wife was a little bit nervous about, is there going to be a gap? Am I going to be able to teach all of these things? Should I even be homeschooling? Why should I even be thinking about this? Because there's a whole bunch of other people who don't homeschool, and maybe there are people who are experts in education, and I'm not an expert in education. So you have all these competing ideas. So who would you say could be a homeschooler? What parents are parents that could be homeschool parents?
That's a great question, and I like how you talked about parents question. Gosh, I may not be an expert in education. There are people that are experts in education that do education, and while that's true that parents might not be experts in education, but they are experts at their kids, right?
Wow.
That God gave them those children.
Wow, so, I want to hold your thought, but that is that's a quotable quote, I think.
Okay. Parents
are experts on their kids.
Right.
Parents might not be experts in education, and we could break that down. Parents might not be might not be experts in science.
Right.
Parents might not be experts in math. Parents are experts in their children. I really like that. That should be a bumper sticker.
There you go. We'll print them up and start slapping them on cars. But that's just it. They're experts of their kids, right? And God gave your children to you, and He wouldn't have done so if you were not capable of raising them, right? And with that said, I'm going to just shy of making an absolute statement, but I think that almost anyone can homeschool if they approach it with the right heart, with the right mentality.
Okay.
Right? I talk to a lot of parents. So my background is I'm a classical conversations director for Foundations and Essentials, which effectively is 4-year-olds to 12-year-olds.
Okay. Well, so that's a wide range.
It is, and we work it almost like like the one-room schoolhouse, right? Where we separate students not by ages but by stages. And the parents that are in there, it's easy to ask a parent, "Hey, do you think you could teach 2nd grade math?" Well, yeah, most people are comfortable with doing 2nd grade math, but you start talking about calculus or physics or chemistry or Latin, and some of the trepidation comes out, and they're not quite sure whether they can handle that. And one of the things I tell the parents is, well, how are your students going to handle that when they get to that point? Well, they're going to learn as they go. And I say, well, why don't you just learn alongside them, right? Because if you can approach this with a humble heart and be the lead learner of your homeschool, and recognize that you're not always going to have the answer, and show your children that you don't always have the answer. But when they come to you, and instead of getting defensive when they ask a question that you don't know the answer to,
right, which surely is going to happen.
Oh, it will, because you are going to raise children that are smarter than you.
By God's grace, amen.
And that's a good thing,
Amen.
right? That's not a bad thing. We want children that are smarter than us so that
Yes.
our children can raise grandchildren that are smarter than them.
Yes.
Right? That's the path that we're trying to take.
Right.
But I'm losing my train of thought talking about children getting excited about being smarter than us.
It's because those parents, what you're saying, I'll help pick up your train of thought, right? So where you were going, I think, is that parents learning alongside their children are going to be equipped when the time comes to help their children learn. But more importantly, when our children come to us and see us struggling with something or trying to learn something, we're actually getting the opportunity to model what learning looks like. We're also modeling humility, I think, which is something that we all need more of. I mean, I know I can speak for myself, but
I'm right there with you.
And I look at humanity and I look at my own children, right? Great kids. I love my boys. Incredibly proud of them. Blessed beyond belief to have these children, and I give a lot of credit to my wife for that. But by God's grace, they're learning to become humble, right? By failing, by making mistakes, right, and learning. And when we homeschool, that is, when we are present and attentive mommy and daddy through this education process. And you said earlier that you found that the academics are taking care of themselves.
Right.
That really what's exciting is the character and the virtue that you are seeing being instilled in your daughters, that you and your wife are lovingly instilling, that you and your wife are modeling, right? And so when our children see us learning, because we don't know everything, they are learning humility by seeing us model that. They are also learning to learn,
right?
Which is the skill, the most important skill, right? I mean, it is a skill to learn.
Right. And you've got, so looking at your boys into adulthood now, right?
Right.
The cool part about modeling the humility for them, when they approach something with humility, they also have confidence.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Knowing that, gosh, I might not know the answer to this, but I can go find it. And if I need to teach myself, I can do that. So they become adults and they want to learn motorcycle repair, or they want to learn how to tile a bathroom floor. They aren't afraid to go and seek that out. Right. They say, you know what, I don't know how to do this, but someone does out there. I'm going to go learn it. They have that confidence to learn and to teach themselves, right?
Right. I really, really like that point of the dual-sided coin of humility and confidence. The humility to recognize that I don't know, and to acknowledge that I don't know and say, it's okay that I don't know.
Right.
On the other side of that coin is the confidence to go and find out, to go and learn, if that's what is necessary or if that's what they feel called to do. Right. And the same thing for us. I think I'm getting excited because, and I might lose my train of thought.
Okay.
But so you'll have to pick it up for me.
I got you.
We're really having multiple generations of education happen at the same time when we are present and attentive with our children and learning alongside them, right? Because I am also reminding myself that as a 49-year-old man, if I want to learn something new, I can humble myself and I have the skills to learn it.
Right.
So I don't need to be afraid or intimidated.
Right.
And what a wonderful gift that is. It is truly the gift of God.
It is.
Right? We have the privilege of discovering truth, day by day in God's creation. And some of that truth is about practical application, how to do the dishes.
Right.
How to tile a bathroom floor, right?
Right.
And all of it is about learning how to love God and love each other while we're doing those things.
Right. And so you and your wife are towards the end of this homeschool journey, right? And I would say two very successful. I met your boys and they're really impressive. Thanks. All three of them, right? but you've seen this adventure, and you've seen a number of different families, and even at the beginning, being able to be the director of this campus, I see a variety of families. You see the traditional, where it's the stay-at-home mom that becomes the homeschool mom as the primary educator.
Right.
We also have, especially on my campus, we have some stay-at-home homeschool dads that are the primary educator. We've had grandparents who both parents are working, and the grandparents are the primary educators, right? So I just want families to realize that there's no one size fits all. It's a variety for different families. One family on our campus, the dad, he's a firefighter, so he works swing shifts, right? I think it's 2 or 3 days on, 2 or 3 days off.
Right.
And the mom is a PA, a physician's assistant, right? That she's working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, really long hours. So they're able to work through their schedule and homeschool their girls, and they do Saturday school, and they do school on Sunday sometimes. And they're just able to have that flexibility through the homeschool model that they can tailor to exactly what they need, right? So as these families are saying, gosh, I would love to homeschool, but, right, there's a lot of solutions to that, but instead of just saying, well, I can't do it because we both work, or I can't do it because of this or that. There's many reasons. And I think that some real prayer for God to open some doors and really move your heart with solutions would really help a number of families that are struggling with that, but, right, how do I do this?
Right. I think maybe in summing sort of what we've said so far up, I think it's fair to say that you and I would agree that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called.
Right.
And if we're called to homeschooling, God will equip us, right? And there's a sense in which the academics really, truly, and I know a lot of people have a hard time with this. I've lived it. Two of my kids are in college. Right. The other one is a senior in high school. The academics take care of themselves,
They do.
right? And then, so any parent called can do this.
Right.
We're not saying every parent has to do this
No.
or could do this or should do this. There's all kinds of situations that come up. But what we're saying is that really any parent could do this from that academic perspective.
Absolutely.
But then also what you just brought up were some of the other maybe, I don't know what we call them, socioeconomic, societal barriers that might seem to make it difficult to homeschool. I'll use a cliche. If we think outside the box, and you said prayerfully consider options, there are ways for families to homeschool if they want to homeschool.
Right. One of the best analogies you're talking about God equipping us is we don't have to feed the masses. We show up with our loaves and our fish, and He makes that adequate.
Multiplies it,
right? So we show up with our humility, our skill sets, and God makes that more than enough for our children, right, to homeschool them.
Amen. Well, and yes, and it's God's grace, no matter what, right? Whether we're homeschooling or not, we are raising our children.
We are.
And we are making decisions daily in that. And by God's grace, He takes what we have and makes it sufficient and even more than sufficient for our children.
Right.
So, real briefly, in the remaining several minutes that we have for this recorded session, I would like to talk about maybe the top 3 things to consider if one decides to homeschool. Right. So we've gone through why would I homeschool? We've gone through who can homeschool.
Right.
So if we've got a person who decides they want to homeschool and decides that they can homeschool, what would you say would be the top 3 things to consider?
Well, so Lee Borton's Classical Conversations, just an amazing inspiration.
Absolutely.
And has changed so many families.
Yes.
And it's fantastic. One of the things that she would say is, or she would ask the question, are children objects to be measured, or are they souls to be nurtured, right? And I think that short, succinct statement is so profound. And if you just ponder that for a moment, you say, well, yeah, my children are souls. I'm supposed to nurture them, not just measure them as objects, right? Is that your experience, having gone through many years, right, and successfully kicked 2 of them out of the nest?
Right. 2 of them are flying, and I resonate so strongly with that. And I think we've already kind of hit on it a little bit, that nurturing aspect, the nurturing of their souls. The academics take care of themselves. Right. They really, really do. And there are so many ways to get the academics, and so many methods. But it's that present and attentive, mommy and daddy, right. instilling virtues, modeling character, and with all our shortcomings, right? We fail.
Right, not perfect.
No, right, not perfect.
I can suck the fun out of homeschool day like anyone, right?
Amen. Right. There are days,
right,
where we want to lock the kids in the closet and go to Starbucks, or lock ourselves in the closet with a bunch of dark chocolate, like homeschool moms.
But the opposite of those, like those are one end of the spectrum. The other ones are just, you thank God for that opportunity to be working with your student, and when something clicks, and they say, "Oh, I get it," it's just. It's a beautiful moment.
And the nurturing of the soul.
Oh, yes.
That's when they get it, right? When there is that, when you are feeding your child soul food.
Right.
And actually we're imbibing it together because it is by God's grace, as we've already said, right? And so instead of making our children objects to be measured, which is what we were taught to do in school, and probably even in some of our own parents did that, because that's cultural, and so we can tend to do that ourselves. But if we can maintain this perspective of that our children are souls to be nurtured and not objects to be measured, it's really profound in determining how we're going to homeschool.
Right.
So I agree, that's really the first consideration.
The next consideration, and interested to see if you agree, is I think it's community. Now, you and your wife use Classical Conversations.
Yes.
And my wife and I are also part of a Classical Conversations community. And the fellowship that we've had there, the stewardship, the leadership you can get from homeschool parents that are a little bit farther than you are on that path. When you say, "Gosh, there's no way I can do this," and someone can say, "Well, did you try it this way?" And you say, "Well, no, I never thought of doing it that way because I wasn't homeschooled. I went through a public school system, and there's some things, like you said, that are outside the box, and they say, well, try it this way, and amazingly it works." So that community aspect, I think, is very important. If I was trying to homeschool my wife and I with our two girls on an island by ourselves, it'd be really discouraging. The community aspect is so important in our experience. What do you think?
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think, as you mentioned, both of our families have benefited from the Classical Conversations model and community, right? I mean, that's one of the primary tenets of Classical Conversations, which is one reason we chose to go that route. That being said, community is the key, right? And by the work of many who went before us in the homeschool movement early on in the United States, homeschool has proliferated.
Oh, yes.
And there are so many options for community and involvement in things. But I would agree that once we have a perspective that we want our children's souls to be nurtured, we don't want to treat them as objects to be measured. We want them to become the people who God has created them to be, not who I want them to be, not who the school system wants them to be, right? I want to nurture their soul to the point that they become who God wanted them to be. Then how do we do that? Well, we do that in community, right? As iron sharpens iron. Like you said, for us as parents, we get to have other parents speak into us and help us think of things, like you said, that might be out of the box. Our children have peers, right? And there's a very real aspect of learning and communicating that can't be done without peers, right? Our peers, right, our colleagues have different perspectives than we do. As much as we are alike, as much as we enjoy being with each other, we have different perspectives on certain things.
We do.
And it is beneficial for me to be able to hear your perspective.
And likewise, because when you're open and you're humble, right, humble heart, being able to listen or being willing to listen to another perspective and compare that in consideration with yours, oftentimes iron gets sharper, right?
Right, that's right. And you can't have that without community.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, number 2 would be community. And then I would say number 3
follows right on with that, right?
Yes.
The accountability piece. Because again, if we were on an island and it was just our family trying to do it by ourselves, it would be very difficult to do it. But when you have a community, whether it's classical conversations or another community that you're part of, and you're meeting and you're getting together weekly, there's accountability that you are keeping up with what you need to for that community so that you can continue those relationships, right?
Absolutely. I'm almost laughing because before we were really in community, when we started homeschooling when our oldest was 5, it's so easy to say, "Oh, we'll do that tomorrow. Let's go to the ice cream store," or whatever it is, right? Whatever it is that your family's interested in, or you as a parent might be you're tired,
right,
and you don't feel like doing it,
or the lawn needs mowed,
or the
laundry needs done. There's a lot of things that can take away from that home education piece, right? If you don't have that accountability that you're talking about.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. So it's about time to end for this recorded session. So hopefully hopefully our conversation has been helpful, and we'll go ahead and sign off now.
All right.